Probably the most common question out there when people are getting into filmmaking is, what camera should I actually get? And for good reason, because without a camera, you can't really make films. Now, I truly don't believe that there's a perfect camera out there for every shooting situation. And with every camera, there's just gonna be trade-offs no matter what. Whether it's price or features or frame rates or resolution or whatever the case may be, there's always gonna be trade-offs. But in this video, I'm gonna talk about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K and why I think it's the best first camera to get if you're just getting into filmmaking. Now, before we get too far into this, I will preface this by saying I understand that there's a ton of hybrid DSLR mirrorless cameras out there, like the EOS R from Canon and the Sony a7 III and the GH5, and the list goes on. But I truly believe that for purely filmmaking, I believe that this camera, for its features, is a better option than those hybrid cameras. But if you're wanting to do photo and video, then this camera's probably not the best option for you. But if you're just doing filmmaking, I definitely recommend getting this camera. So without further ado, let's jump into the first reason. And the first reason is the relative low cost of entry. Now, for $1,300, you get the camera and a license, a DaVinci Resolve, which I'll get to in a minute. But other than that, you just need a battery and an SD card and a lens to start shooting. And you honestly, I made a whole video on how much does it really cost to own the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. And you can really be into this whole camera system for under $2,000, and that's memory card and lens and everything that you need to start shooting and to create content with this camera. So the next thing I want to talk about are the exposure tools built into the camera. Now, these are professional exposure tools built into the camera, which are awesome, and really not a lot of cameras out there have them. Now, the camera does have a histogram at the bottom left of the screen, which is pretty useless, and don't really know why Blackmagic even put it on there, but for you photo folks out there that are used to histogram, could be helpful. It also has zebras, which basically, if you're not sure what zebras are, it basically has these little zebra stripes over any part of the image where the highlights are being clipped. So if long as you don't have zebras showing up on your screen, then all your highlights are protected. But more so, and even the more powerful tool than that, is what's called false color. Now, if you're not sure what false color is, I'll link a video above and down below and all that kind of stuff. But basically what it does is it shows exposure values for the entire scene. You can expose for your skin tones. You know what your highlights are going to be at. You know where your shadows are, so you're aware of the entire scene of the exposure. So if something's underlit or underexposed, you can add light or whatever the case may be using your false color on the monitor. And it's very accurate on this camera, and it makes exposure so much easier than either just relying on the screen or just using zebras, because honestly, zebras, once you use false color, you'll never use zebras again. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the input-output side of the camera right here. And this is also what not a lot of these hybrid DSLR cameras out there have. And we're just gonna start from the top and go all the way to the bottom. So at the top, it has a 3.5mm input jack. Yep, most cameras have that. Not a big deal. But the cool thing about this 3.5mm input is you can actually jam timecode into it. You got a dedicated headphone jack here on the side, so you can monitor your audio. Full-size HDMI, if you come from the Sony world and even the Canon world, where you have either the mini or the micro HDMI ports, you're gonna really love the full-size HDMI port that's on here, because it's definitely more robust than those mini HDMI ports. Those things fry all the time. The next thing is this USB Type-C port, and the really cool thing about this is you can, number one, you can record to external SSD drives like the Samsung T5 drive, and you can record to any frame rate, any quality, no matter what, in this camera. And it's super awesome to be able to have that at your disposal. It's much cheaper than CFast cards. The next thing is the power input. It's a 2-pin LEMO style input, and it locks into place when you plug it in. So yeah, it's just kind of makes it feel more robust, professional feeling, knowing that your power is going to be always locked into place, and you never have to worry about it being pulled out on set or anything like that. And the last thing is the XLR on the bottom. Now, it is a mini XLR, but it gives you all the benefits of full-size XLR, except for the size of the port, obviously. You can provide phantom power, super awesome. Providing phantom power, you can use much more professional mics. You don't have to rely on little onboard microphones or anything like that. And the preamps in here actually sound really good. And the cool thing is, you can actually run audio into this and to this port at the same time and just set them to different channels on the camera, and you can have either backup audio, or you can have a lav mic running in one and a shotgun running in the other. So you kind of have dual audio recording honestly built right into the camera. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is the lens mount of the camera. Now, it is an active mount, so it has electrical connections at the bottom, just like any Panasonic GH5 or anything like that. So you can use native micro four thirds lenses, like a really popular one is the Panasonic 12 to 35. But because of the small flange distance from the sensor that is on the micro four thirds mount, you can adapt a ton of different lens mounts to it using adapters. Now, what I have on here is the Metabone Speed Booster. It is the EF version, so I can adapt all of my EF lenses from my Canon cameras to this camera without any problems. And right here, it has a piece of glass in here, you can kind of see right there, and it's called a Speed Booster. And what that does is it kind of widens that field of view, and it's kind of like the opposite of a teleconverter for you photography folks out there. And it widens the field of view, and it actually lets more light into the sensor, so you're kind of gaining like a stop of light almost by using the Speed Booster. Okay, so the next thing I'll talk about is the biggest selling point, at least for me, for the camera, and it's the recording codecs. So you can shoot in two flavors of video formats. You can shoot in ProRes or Blackmagic RAW. ProRes is an industry standard editing codec. It's a really robust codec to be able to edit and color grade. It has a lot of information. The bit rates are really high, so really great codec there. But even more of a big selling point for me is being able to shoot in Blackmagic RAW. Now, if you don't know what Blackmagic RAW is Blackmagic Design's own proprietary RAW video format. Most of the cinema camera manufacturers out there have their own flavor of RAW. Canon has one, RØDE, Arri. All those cameras have their own version of a RAW video format, and basically it's kind of like shooting JPEG versus RAW on a stills camera. When you're shooting in Blackmagic RAW, you bring all the footage into DaVinci Resolve, and you have all the RAW controls at your fingertips. You can change white balance, you can change your ISO setting, all that kind of stuff you can change within DaVinci Resolve without having to worry about it setting it in camera, which is pretty stinking awesome. And the beauty of Blackmagic RAW is there are a ton of different compression ratios that you can record at. So if you want to record really high-end VFX type stuff where you need the most qualities possible, you can choose a constant quality or a constant bit rate, which means the file sizes are going to be huge, but there's going to be a ton of information and ton of data in there to be able to key out anything you need. But if you're on a budget, or you're doing something where you just don't want to have to take up a ton of storage on your computer or your hard drives, or if you're just shooting something that doesn't need super heavy VFX work, you can record to these little guys right here, these little SD cards. You can record Blackmagic RAW 12:1 compression on these in DCI 4K, up to 60p, and yeah, Blackmagic RAW is the real deal. I mean, record RAW to SD cards is insane. So the next thing we'll talk about is frame rate options that you have on this camera. You can shoot all the way up to 60 frames per second in 4K, which is absolutely insane. And again, you can record on those tiny little SD cards. And if you jump down to 1080p, although it's gonna crop in on the image, you're able to record it to 120 frames per second, which is pretty good. And if you record at the lower compression and the higher quality, basically like the Q0 or maybe the 3:1 compression, the 120p actually does look pretty good. So yeah, frame rates, huge selling point of this camera. 60p in 4K, 120p in HD, and obviously you can shoot in variable frame rates along there. You can shoot at 109 frames per second or something if you wanted to. I don't know why you would, but it's your choice, it's your life, do what you want. So once you've shot all that 4K 60p in Blackmagic RAW, you bring it into DaVinci Resolve, and that's the last thing I'm going to talk about. Blackmagic Design ships a license key to DaVinci Resolve Studio with the camera, and that's huge. It's a $300 program. They give it to you with the purchase of your camera. Obviously, if you buy it used, you might not get that license. But DaVinci Resolve Studio is an extremely powerful editing tool. Obviously, it's an industry standard color grading tool, but it's also a really powerful editing tool, and you can do editing and audio mixing and VFX work and all that kind of stuff, all within the same program, and it comes with the camera. So if you're just getting into filmmaking and you don't really have a particular editing software that you're married to yet, DaVinci Resolve is a great editing software. It's only getting better, and I would take a serious look at editing in DaVinci Resolve. Well, anyways, guys, hope you found this useful. If you did, definitely hit that thumbs up button. Consider hitting that subscribe button down below, and I hope to see you in the next video. Peace.